This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. With this show, our higher-ups were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should, which turned out well for us. Here's what we got for y'all. Tonight, a new phase in the fight over abortion rights that could spur a Supreme Court showdown. Then, the US is leaving Afghanistan, but what will that leave behind? But first, here's what you need to know right now. Footage from the police shooting of a 13-year-old in Chicago was made public today, and now the city is bracing for public protests. Adam Toledo was shot and killed by an officer on March 29th on the west side of Chicago in a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood. Officers were called to the area after a gunfire detection system alerted them to shots fired. Police said there was an armed confrontation which led to the shooting. According to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, Adam had a gun in his hand when he was shot. The state's attorney's office then backpedaled, saying that one attorney misspoke and wasn't fully informed before speaking in court. A gun was recovered at the scene, but body cam video appears to show Adam empty-handed in the seconds between turning around and then being shot in the chest by a Chicago police officer. An independent investigation is still ongoing. Chicago is now preparing for possible unrest over the weekend. The Chicago Police Department has a long history of brutality and racism, and that's created serious mistrust in communities of color.
This lack of trust makes it even more difficult for many of us to wait and hear all the facts before making up our mind in tragedies about this. But again, I urge each resident who cares and loves the city, let's wait until we hear all the facts.
Of course, this comes on the heels of a traffic stop shooting which led to the death of 20-year-old Dante Wright in Minnesota and the ongoing murder trial over George Floyd's killing. The defense for Derek Chauvin in that trial wrapped its case today. The former Minneapolis police officer did not take the stand.
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
The defense's main goal was to try and prove there were other factors aside from Chauvin's actions that caused Floyd's death. On Wednesday, the defense called a former chief medical examiner of Maryland to testify. He said the cause was everything but Chauvin's knee, blaming Floyd's heart issues, drugs found in his system, and maybe even the exhaust from the tailpipe of a nearby police car.
In the area close to an exhaust, you're going to have a much higher level of carbon monoxide than you would if you're 3-4 feet away.
In all, the prosecution presented more than 30 witnesses in its case against Chauvin. They showed various angles of the day Floyd died and pointed to experts about why it was Chauvin's knee which caused his death.
Floyd died from positional asphyxia, which is a fancy way of saying he died because he had no oxygen left in his body.
A break in the trial is expected tomorrow. Closing arguments will begin on Monday, which means jury deliberations could start early next week. The Biden administration has seriously stepped up its sanctions against Russia today. President Biden issued an executive order that formally names the Russian intelligence service as the force behind last year's infamous SolarWinds hack. The hack didn't just dip into government agencies, it also targeted some of the country's largest corporations. Today, the US also slapped new sanctions on 32 entities and individuals for their attempted interference in the 2020 presidential election. At least 10 Russian diplomats were also expelled from the embassy in Washington. These new sanctions were coordinated with European allies. They're sure to bring an even more serious tone to relations between Russia and the West. Abortion is in focus this year with at least one abortion challenge knocking on the door of the Supreme Court. But even if SCOTUS doesn't directly address Roe v. Wade, the landmark decision that protects a person's right to have an abortion, the battle over abortion rights has already accelerated on the local level. Newsy's Amber Strong explains.
Across the U.S., anti-abortion measures are popping up at state legislatures.
They're looking to pass abortion restrictions, and they're looking to do it really quickly this year.
In 2021, 44 states have introduced more than 470 measures aimed at limiting abortion, an increase over previous years. The initiatives are multifaceted. One of the 7 abortion bills recently passed by the Texas Senate bans abortions as early as 6 weeks into a pregnancy. An Indiana law prohibits the use of telemedicine for medication abortion, and an Arkansas measure signed into law last month would allow abortions only in cases where the woman or fetus's life is at stake. The governor says he'd prefer to make exceptions for rape or incest, but that enacting the law isn't the point.
I signed it because it is a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. That was the intent of it.
The overall goal is to see less abortion in the U.S. One way to do that is to get rid of the constitutional right to an abortion, Roe v. Wade. That happens here at the U.S. Supreme Court, where there are 6 Republican-appointed justices.
There's a lot of disagreement, right, on what type of law the Supreme Court might look at to be that case. That could be the linchpin, the one that overturns decades of Supreme Court overreach on the issue of life.
One case to watch, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, a challenge to Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban. It's been set for conference, sitting on the High Court's to-do list, but there's no action to review or deny the appeal so far.
If the court were to take this case, it would send a real signal that they are getting ready to weaken abortion rights because the law is not in effect. The other courts struck it down.
Even if the Supreme Court does not take Dobbs in 2021, there will be an abortion case in the coming years that will, test this new majority.
Anti-abortion legislators are betting on that, instituting so-called trigger laws meant to go into effect should the justices overturn Roe v. Wade.
And so they want to have these in place in case that happens, so that the state would, in very short order, sometimes within days, ban abortion.
However, legislatures who support abortion rights have introduced their own measures just in case.
Progressive states put some guardrails to protect abortion rights as well. It's just not at the same volume or necessarily the same intensity as we're seeing on abortion restrictions and bans.
Now, should the court decide to take up the Mississippi case, they could examine whether abortion clinics have a right to sue the state on behalf of a patient in the first place. That's a question they failed to clearly answer in another big abortion case last summer. Amber Strong, Newsy, the Supreme Court.
When you're back, we'll tell you about a successful attempt at faking it until you make it. There are levels to role-playing. On one end of the spectrum, you've got like community theater. On the other, you've got a gamer posing as a journalist who played their way into White House press briefings. We're diving into the world of fake news outlets and gaming with one of our favorite segments, Next Level Speedrun, starting with this. Gamers have infiltrated the White House press corps. This is not a drill.
How involved is former President Obama and First Lady Obama in the Biden-Harris administration?
Actual reporter Chris Johnson read that question at the White House press briefing on behalf of Casey Montague, a reporter who works for White House News. Thing is, both Montague and White House News are fictional. Politico reports the stunt originated on Roblox, an online gaming platform that's kind of like a mix between Minecraft and Legos. This particular server apparently role-plays a pretend US government. Presumably, faking your way into the real White House is a badge of honor there. These kinds of stunts will be more difficult to pull off once COVID restrictions end. If you too want to scam the White House, you better get moving on that. I'll be honest, being in front of a camera for even just a half hour every day is taxing enough. Filming constantly for a whole month sounds like an absolute nightmare.
To you I say, Ludwig 7. Thanks for hanging.
It's a nightmare that streamer Ludwig Ogren recently freed himself from. After streaming for 31 days straight on Twitch, Ogren finally turned off the cameras on Tuesday. The broadcast broke the record for longest running stream on Twitch as viewers tuned in to watch Ogren play games, work out, or just sleep throughout the night. The event started as a subscription drive for Ogren. Every new follower would add 10 seconds to the length of his live stream. He ended the stream with over 280 paying subscriptions, another broken record for the platform, by the way. Subscribers might have been able to keep the stream going even longer, but Ogren set 31 days as his hard out. In related news, I just had a killer idea for a Truman Show reboot. Someone in Hollywood, please hit me up. Nintendo broadcast another news dump this week. This one focused on its upcoming plans with independent game studios. The 20-minute showcase highlighted many smaller scale games coming to Nintendo's Switch console. Highlights included a re-release of seminal indie hit Fez, a follow-up to skateboarding platformer Ollie Ollie, and a sequel to surrealist adventure game Oxenfree. Nintendo consoles used to have the reputation for catering to Nintendo exclusive games above all else, but the company switched up that policy with the Switch, opening the floodgates for indie developers to port their projects over to the console. The focus on less power-intensive indie games also helps compensate for the Switch's aging graphics performance, which is good since Nintendo still hasn't announced any plans for a new souped-up console just yet. President Biden has announced that U.S. troops will leave Afghanistan by September 11th, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. But this announcement presents some new intelligence challenges. The country could collapse to the Taliban or become a base for terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. Newsy's Sasha Ingber talked to former government officials about what implications the withdrawal could have.
With President Joe Biden's announcement that U.S. troops leave Afghanistan by September 11th,
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war.
Come fears for what happens next. Even the new CIA director warned senators.
When the time comes for the U.S. military to withdraw, the U.S. government's ability to collect and act on threats will diminish. That's simply a fact.
Former officials have dire words.
We will rue the day when we made this decision. I think that the loss politically and diplomatically and intelligence-wise is incalculable.
Carl Ford ran the State Department's intelligence unit when the U.S. invasion began in 2001. He tells Newsy officers started out wrong, not truly understanding the bottom-up power structure of Afghanistan, and that our departure, 20 years later, will give terrorists free rein to prepare operations against the region and the U.S.
Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, I guarantee you, will take advantage of our absence from Afghanistan.
Former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Vince Stewart, who is a member of the Biden transition team, supports the withdrawal but worries the Afghan government could collapse to the Taliban.
I'm very concerned about the scenario in Afghanistan where the government might not have the capability and or willingness to stand against the Taliban. It isn't because they're not been trained. It isn't because they have not been equipped. It is really a matter of will.
The U.S. also loses an important base for intelligence collection, not just on Afghanistan, but the region, Pakistan, Russia, and Turkey. About 2,500 U.S. troops are stationed in Afghanistan, and the president says more than 2,200 have died in the last 20 years. Some troops are likely to remain out of the U.S. Embassy in Kabul.
There probably will be some minimal forces. If that's the case, I hope it is absolutely the minimal, because you're now increasing target opportunities with a smaller force footprint.
A Taliban spokesperson said after President Biden's announcement that if a previous agreement to pull out by May 1st isn't met, problems will certainly be compounded. And though the administration says it'll continue to support the Afghan people, for now, a hope of turning the country into a stable democracy and partner in the Middle East leaves with U.S. and NATO troops. From Washington, Sasha Ingber, Newsy.
When you're back, we'll take a closer look at an Oscar contender for Best Live Action Short Film. The Oscars are in a couple of weeks, which means we're ramping up coverage, and in my personal time, I'm reading up on past controversies in preparation for this year's ceremony. Newsy's Casey Mendoza is on top of Oscars coverage and spoke to the director of one of the nominees for Best Live Action Short Film.
Feeling Through tells the story of a chance encounter between a homeless teen and a deafblind man trying to get back home. The film is nominated for the Oscar for Best Live-Action Short Film, and it's already made history as the first to cast a deafblind actor, Robert Tarango, in a lead role.
Robert being such a key part of cultivating that beautiful energy shows through in the story. And I think ultimately the film wouldn't be anywhere near what it is without Robert's participation.
Tarango was cast after a nationwide search with help from the Helen Keller National Center. Roland hopes the project, which was executive produced by deaf Oscar award-winning actress Marlee Matlin, can improve representation and accessibility in Hollywood.
It made me feel so excited. I was like, wait, are you serious? I'm auditioning for something?
People with disabilities make up 26% of the U.S. adult population, but of the top 100 grossing films of 2019, they were represented 2.3% of the time.
Me, I think there's an obligation as a storyteller, regardless of genre, to reflect accurately the world that we live in, and I think that means including the people that make it up.
Oh, sorry. It doesn't matter if I'm deaf and legally blind. I still felt like I could do it.
There's this perception that including someone with a disability on set is going to be costly and have this whole set of, challenges and obstacles. That's not the right lens to look through, because everything is challenging and hard on a film set.
Beyond making the set more accessible, Roland and the Helen Keller National Center also sought to screen the film for deaf, blind, and deafblind audiences around the country, hiring about 50 interpreters per screening.
I was sitting in the very back of the theater, and to see people experiencing this film in such different ways, tactilely, again, through audio description, visual interpreters, it really completely redefined my understanding of what it means to experience a film.
Before the pandemic, the Feeling Through experience, which included the short film, documentary, and Q&A, was held at 14 different events around the country.
The first person to stand up during the Q&A was a man who's deafblind, who had the entire experience tactilely signed to him. He said that, people assume that because I'm deaf and blind, I wouldn't care to come out to the movies. But I love this. I love having a shared experience with people. I just never have the opportunity because there's not the accessibility for me to do so.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. We'll use that hashtag to coordinate a group watch of Feeling Through, which is currently available on YouTube. I'm not kidding. Let's set it up. A record number of bank branches closed in 2020 because of the pandemic, eliminating services like check cashing or loans. Rural and low-income communities have been especially hard hit by the closures. National reporter Chloe Nordquist tells us about one bank looking to expand its footprint to serve communities that need it most.
Restaurants, gas stations, banks, these are all staples of communities no matter the size. But as banks close their doors, especially in rural communities, essential services are harder to access.
All right, give me just a minute.
Cash a check, talk about loans.
Yes, ma'am.
That's what you visit a bank for, but at Southern Bancorp, there's a little more to it.
Yes, ma'am. As soon as I make a deposit, it's going to post right away.
Southern Bancorp is a CDFI. That stands for Community Development Financial Institution.
What makes a CDFI different than these larger banking institutions?
So I think it really comes down to one word: intentionality. CDFIs are very intentional about their work. We specifically go out to serve a financially underserved population. For us, it's rural America.
That's where credit counselors like Charlestine Harris come in.
I had a lot of people to help me to get back on my feet, and so I just promised the Lord that when I got back on my feet, I would reach back and help other people. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I've been to the bottom.
Instead of turning someone away for a low credit score, for example, Charlestine works with customers to get them where they want to be.
Here's an area that we may need to discuss later. Here's an area that they're doing really well in. Here's an area that we know where to put it.
We do around 7,000 loans a year, and a little over half of those are for less than $10,000.
Rural communities have slowly been forgotten by banks as brick and mortar locations close their doors at record rates.
In this country, we've seen a drastic reduction in the number of bank branches over the years, and the pandemic only exacerbated that.
It's an issue the National Community Reinvestment Coalition has been tracking for years.
Between 2012 and 2018, we saw a 31% decline in small banks and an almost 12% decline in intermediate banks.
A study done by the coalition shows more than 13,000 bank branches closed in the U.S. between 2008 and 2020, 14% of all branches.
These are the kinds of community banks that you see present in rural communities and in low income communities.
For Kinchin O'Keefe, having banks physically in his community is important.
In Clarksdale, we need that human relationship, that person to person.
O'Keefe is now the director of tourism for the area, but in his lifetime, he's played a big role in revitalizing this town, where banks have given him what he's needed to bring places back to life.
Banking kept this downtown from dying. It was dying. It was right there at death's door.
Now there's also a heavy reliance on technology, which isn't always an option for those in rural towns.
A lot of people don't have access to phones. A lot of people that might have access to phones, cell phones, don't know what an app is.
The first question you'll get from the average person around here is, what is an app?
And that's why CDFIs exist. Southern Bancorp is growing their presence in more rural communities to fill a void left by other banks.
Our hope is that, with all the attention that's been brought to CDFIs during the pandemic, that more people will look for a CDFI and see if they can help them on their own personal wealth building journey.
With photojournalist Andrew Snadeke, I'm Chloe Nordquist reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.